Thank you for joining us for this sermon podcast from United Church on the Green, located in New Haven, Connecticut. No matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are invited and welcome. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to learn more about our open and affirming ministry at United Church on the Green, please visit our website at unitednewhaven.org. Thank you.
Our reading today comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 6, verses 1 through 21. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up to the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land toward which they were going. Friends, God is still speaking. May our hungry hearts be open to listen.
Will you please pray with me? Dear Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. Amen.
Amen.
It's wonderful to start off the morning thinking about our hungry hearts. With all the food that is here before us that we are going to be preparing for the houseless people on the green, we have the perfect metaphor for us of what it is to have bread for the journey. You know, I was most impressed last week with our potluck supper, where we had over 80 people here for dinner, with the Chinese food that was absolutely incredible, with hungry people eating and sharing so fluidly. It was a wonderful experience for those of us who were there. It was really an amazing way to celebrate community, to celebrate fellowship, to be able to break bread with one another. It was a very, very powerful experience for me. Do you know, when I was growing up, my parents believed in sharing of their gracious plenty. We had a large faculty house with lots of food in it, and they had an open door policy when anybody who was hungry or who wanted to come and talk was invited in. My brother and I would often hear our parents whisper to us saying, FHB, which stands for family, hold back. We learned how it was that we could share out of our gracious plenty, and it was a powerful reminder to me today of how it is as a Christian community we can do the same. I'm reminded of the theology of potluck suppers here, similar to the feeding of the 5,000 here in the Bradley room. There will always be enough is the theology here. One dinner, June reminds us that we had 7 baked bean casseroles and that was all. And yet there was baked bean casseroles for everyone. The gospel reading from John that Dan read to us today is about Jesus meeting people just before the Passover. People who were hungry for food and for healing and for forgiveness, and especially hungry for hope. In this story, we hear about Jesus' compassion and about his healing miracles. We learn about the importance of sharing. And we know how a little bundle of food put together with other bundles can make a whole. We learn the significance of a shared meal, which is indeed the value of community, which is another definition that we have of church. Last week, Jesus directed his disciples to go out in pairs, remember that? And to stay in homes and stay for as long as they were welcome. And we were reminded that we are all the equipment that we need. But when they would stay at these people's homes, they were fed generously. Again, it was the beginning of what we would call a home church. And having spent a week with our Chinese students, guests, and talking with them about how it is in their China, in Shenzhen where they live, they're not allowed to worship God in community. They have to worship God only in home churches, which, as you know, in China are really forbidden, but they become very quiet yet very powerful places of worship and places of sharing food and sharing hope. One of the women that came as one of the teachers with our students was a music teacher. And as she was in worship with us last week and we were singing out of our red hymnals, she said, "Oh, I would love one of these hymnals. May I take one of them with me?" Because my experience is, every time I have been to a home church in China, is that everybody knows the words verbatim, and not just the first verse, but all of the verses, and they sing them in English. Music is a very important part of these home churches, as is, of course, worship together. One of the reasons that we're so excited about being able to not only make sandwiches within our worship service, we'll also have an opportunity to bless the food. And bless each of you who are making them, and some of you whom I hope will take up the invitation to help us serve it at 2 o'clock over at Trinity Church at the Chapel on the Green. But we understand for those who are hungry, those desiring community and fellowship, find it when we provide food out of our generous plenty. I love the quote that you will find in your bulletin, and I'd like you to turn to it, please. This is by our William Sloane Coffin. Many of us know him. I knew him personally as a child growing up at Williams before he came to Yale, but that's when he became the most famous. But I love this quote, and so I want you to read along with me when I share this with you. It seems to me that in joining a church, you leave home and hometown to join a larger world. The whole world is your new neighborhood, and all who dwell therein. Black, white, yellow, red, stuffed and starving, smart and stupid, mighty and lowly, criminal and self-respecting, American or Russian, all become your sisters and brothers in the new family found in Jesus. By joining a church, you declare your individuality in the most radical way in order to affirm community on the widest possible scale. Have any of you read that before or heard of it? William Sloane Coffin always had a way of putting things right where it was, and I thought how timely that he would even talk about all people and even Russian, considering all that's been happening in our politics that are going on today. But I'd like to talk with you a little bit briefly, just one-on-one, many-on-many, about what we mean by talking about an expansive concept of church. Has this been your experience here at the United Church on the Green? Has it been your experience in urban New Haven? And has it been your experience as part of the United Church of Christ? And share with me now, and I have a microphone if some of you want to come forward. And please, let's not be shy. One of the beauties of being able to worship down here is that we can be informal and we can be in dialogue rather than being talked at. And I hope none of you think I really talk at you. But let's at least be in dialogue. Okay, who's going to be number one? Who's going to be number one? Well, maybe I was number one. Who's going to be number two? What about church as a wider community? What does that mean? Thank you, Al. God bless you. Would someone like to bring this over to Al? Ready now, right here on the stage.
I guess, even though I like to think that I live a fairly broad life, where I come into contact with a lot of different elements of the world, I think more of my family who think that they live broad lives and they really don't. And everything tends to be very cookie cutter, and they tend to associate with people just like them. The church is really the one place where I can count on coming to and talking to people of all different social and economic strata, of all different economic and sexual orientations, people of varying all the colors of the rainbow, and people getting and really coming to understand their perspectives, and feeling more connected and plugged into the whole human race.
Great. Dan.
Thank you. So central to our worship, I think, and most meaningful part to me is when we fellowship around the communion table. And I'm reminded that the first communion was a meal, a full meal. And even though it's symbolic in our church, we are certainly filled spiritually.
I think what most says community to me is the prayer part of the service, when we pray for people we know and people we don't know, and with people with all different kinds of concerns or celebrations that we may or may not be familiar with.
Gary.
My first thought is I would have said what he said, Al. But then I thought, okay, I could go a little further in a little slightly different direction. So last night we were at the movie with some family members, and after the movie, which, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. After the movie, which was the movie about being out in the wilderness, in Oregon and Washington, with the father and daughter. Father had PTSD, and they were always living in the woods and kind of ready to be on the run. And afterwards, somebody said, I didn't get the point. And I was thinking, I felt on the spot, trying to say, well, you know, what was the point? But I feel, and I felt like I was running out of time to do that. I feel like here, there's plenty of time for me to get the point, and if I don't get the point, I can wait for it to get to me.
Oh, I love it. If she doesn't get the point, here she can wait for the point to get to her. Thank you. Good. That's
Good morning, and I too agree with Al. With my family, when I go home to Virginia, it seems that I have to be prepared for debate. And I kind of stand alone. And as much as I enjoy attending the church that I grew up in, it seems like I'm in a time capsule. It has not changed. Their views are the same. And I love the people, but, you know, I wish they were a little more progressive. And this church, I would have to say, Erskine and I went to many churches before settling here. And what I loved about it is the diversity and what we stand for.
Thank you, and I think the diversity is such an important part of what William Sloane Coffin was talking about way back then, and it's so much more even important today. Come on, people, there's more about community. What's your experience here?
I learned about being kind to others when they're not even kind to you. And even on the streets, when I learned when someone's hungry, offer them something to eat.
Very good, Harleen, thank you. And hopefully we'll be doing that today, won't we?
Hi, my name is Marty, and I'm visiting here. I know Caesar from way back in high school, and as I reflected on it,
Way back.
okay, the year before last. And I realized that I don't qualify according to any of the criteria that Pastor Bonnie gave us, you know, a member and a this and a that and the other. But I also think to myself as I read this, by the way, as a visitor, this is my second visit here, I have felt tremendously welcome, like a pilgrim who stopped for the night, or, you know, to be among friends, especially friends of faith. But I'm struck by the fact that I'm sure that Pastor Coffin didn't mean to say that when we leave our own home and our own hometown and we join a church, then that's the end of our journey. No, it strikes me, and I certainly can testify to this, because I'm not a member of the UCC as much as I admire so much of what you believe and practice. So this for me is a stepping out of yet another place of comfort, and yet still a place where the discovery is that I'm embraced here too.
Yes,
and
yes.
The larger church is there for all of us.
Thank you, that's very important, that this is not the end of one's journey, is it? But it's the beginning for many people in different chapters. Lisa, could you share a little bit for us about what it's like from you living in Texas and coming? Lisa, over here.
Which Lisa? That Lisa.
Common 60s name. So for those of you who don't know, I live most of the year in Texas. I'm a professor there, but I come up here in New Haven and house it for some friends. So this is sort of like my summer church. And so for me, it's always very refreshing to be here, as much as I love my church in Texas. I mean, as you can imagine, church in Texas is, even a liberal church is conservative. And so it's nice to be someplace where there is much more of a conscious sense of social justice, the history of social justice, where you can see the diversity within the community. You can see the diversity in terms of the types of outreaches there are. And yeah, from my very first time here, I've always felt welcomed and have, you know, brought friends. Oh, check out this church, it's so different from my church in Texas. And so for me, it's always just a refreshing sort of, oh, I get to go back to, you know, United Church in the summer and, you know, worship with all kinds of people, not where there's some sort of, you know, filter. And that is really just cool, because, right, that is what the family of God is. It's welcoming to all. And that I always am impressed with the confessions that really hearken to the sense of, wow, yeah, okay, we still need to do better about this. We still, as a church, do not completely represent who Jesus was. And that calling is just so palpable here. So, yeah, that's sort of my experience.
Thank you, Lisa, I really appreciate it. Yes?
I was raised Catholic, and when you were a small Catholic child in the 1950s, you spent a lot of time memorizing the questions and answers in the Baltimore Catechism. And a lot of that I've forgotten, but one question was, who is my neighbor? And the answer is, everyone is my neighbor. And here there's a real sense of everyone being my neighbor. And also, just a little quotation that I love from Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein said that everyone is equally foolish and equally wise in the eyes of God.
There's always hope.
There's a sense of all of us being truly equal.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. George, you're standing up. Do you have anything to say?
No, I just wanted to give somebody my chair.
But isn't that a metaphor of what church is all about, right? Giving our seat to others. So, Barbara?
I think my experience in the last few years, and we've been members here since 1981 through the Nat Synod, when I had my stroke, the sense of community I felt from the church was so incredibly powerful as Roger and I tried to figure out what the heck just happened and where do we go from here. The sense of being cared about and being cared for, an old-fashioned thing from old-fashioned churches or conservative churches, whatever, but this church really came through for us.
That's beautiful. You know, Barbara, I was talking to somebody outside the church with Peter this morning from Trinity Church, and she's working on trying to find some of the history of some of the women and some of the, I guess, the people who give money, the donors to the Children's Center in Hamden. And one of the benefactors originated in this church. And so she was saying the next thing we're going to do after we find the history of who all these people are, we're now going to do the babies' stories. And I went, oh, I know somebody. So the church was here for you then too. Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, we're an adoptive family, and our daughter came to us through the Children's Center in 1982.
Yeah, 1982. Very good. Anyone else? Larry.
Now, I belong to a number of different communities, and I find they're all united in some different way. Now, the family I was brought up with was united by religion. They were all Catholics in the neighborhood, and certainly by race and ethnically we were either Italian or Irish. So when I got older and would join different groups, I'd notice more diversity in these areas. But they would all have. When I came out, the gay community was a lot more ethnically and racially diverse than I grew up with. But we were all united by something. And at this church, we're united, strangely, I wouldn't say by a common faith so much as common values.
Yeah.
And my bet is we all listen to NPR. But we have to, important to understand there's a lot of people there who think very differently than us about politics and stuff like that. And we have to get along with them and see their humanity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Karen.
I guess I'll talk a little bit about our parish house gardens. I used to work often with Jennifer Pugh and another team that included Al, Tina Burgett, Roger Adams, and Jennifer and I used to say that Al Tina and Roger were the brains of the operation of maintaining the gardens, and Jennifer and I were the brawn. But I think the Parish House Gardens are like a little oasis in the middle of New Haven. And you would not believe the numbers of people that pass by, comment on the gardens. Will tells me that people set up lawn chairs and take pictures of themselves and their entire families in front of the hospice.
They do.
Exactly. But also many people who are in need of soup kitchens stop by. They ask us where the nearest one is. I go to my car, I give them the street sheet and also the list of soup kitchens and pantries that our social mission committee provides. But I just think it's a very welcoming place to everyone in our community, especially those without homes, in need of services. They like to visit with Bonnie. I think people without homes deserve a beautiful environment like our parish house provides. And I think it's part of the welcoming nature of our church, and I'm very, very proud of it.
Well, we're very proud of it too, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place to work, to be a part of, and to be proud of.
I know it's not my turn because I already went once, but I wanted to pick up on what Karen was saying. It wasn't so very many years ago that our garden wasn't a garden at all. It could not be so described. It was so scrawny, so difficult, because very little effort was made. And that has made the place, well, a destination for some, and a place that is now known that was unknown. And that shows United, and especially that team,
yes,
as having a fairly recent, new, very successful mission accomplished for the whole of New Haven.
Exactly.
What about the birds?
Then the birds, well, it started with John Gagne's flamingos.
Yep.
That's right. Got everybody's attention.
It sure did, and sure does. Yeah.
And if anybody would like to help Karen and Roger now with the garden, they could use some more brawn.
And I will tell you, the outreach committee is also working on updating that sheet to make sure that all the days and times and places are correct, so that we will have a bunch of them out for everybody to give out as well. Anybody else like to speak? Who's interested? Yes, Lisa. You going to speak?
Yeah, the Lisa.
No? It was interesting what Larry was saying about we all have very shared values. One of the things we were doing with our Chinese students was we were trying to give them an understanding of who we are as Christians, but we were being very careful to not proselytize. But we were able to do so by talking about the common values that we have as individuals here. And we were talking about truth, and we were talking about beauty, and we were talking about love, and we were talking about forgiveness, and talked about trust. And then I was able to bring in the Beatitudes as we were talking about what it is to be humble and what it is to be generous and to be giving. You know, it's in Christ where the dividing walls and the barriers that we have built can be torn down. And community is built out of people that says yes to the call to follow Jesus, to love one another and to break bread with one another, and to have food for our journey, the journey that doesn't just end here, the journey that continues. For indeed, we are a people that have been called to be sent out into the world, beyond our walls, to share the good news, and doing so today by feeding the houseless on the green. We're making in a small part a very different concept of what it is to be here in urban New Haven. If we seriously take this call in Scripture to feed the hungry, to feed the 5,000, however we might define that, it will take the young child 5 loaves and small fish as food, turned into the miracle of compassion, the miracle of planning and achievement and involvement. And that means it takes church. The miracle of feeding the 5,000 gives to us in all four Gospels what was life-changing for many. We are called to be church, to feed the hungry, to have bread for our journey. May we be part of that today as we feed all those people. How many thousands of people do we have on the green that we need to feed every year? But today we're making how many sandwiches, George? How many? 200 sandwiches. And following this, we will all come forward and begin a process of doing that as well. Amen.
Amen.